Welcome to Dan and Sarah Makers. Today I'm going to show you how to make this warm, fuzzy stocking cap with braids. This time of year is really cold. As we can see right now, it's snowing here in the northern US. And one of the biggest challenges I have is finding a stocking cap that fits my giant head. So I made my own. I am going to show you the process of making the patterns, how I started out with a stocking cap that sort of fit me, and how I ended up with this. Let's take a look. I went ahead and picked this hat because I like the little ear muff that's built in. So I need to figure out about how my pattern is going to be reproduced. I have a lot of hats, but this is the closest one to what I want it to look like. So I'm going to set it on some paper, and the top part, the crown here, is not as critical. We can make this as tall as we want, as long as from one ear to the other ear there's enough there's enough fabric to cover your head. But usually you want to kind of make it as long as you can with the fabric you have. So the next thing you want to do is you want to figure out approximately how much stretch is in the fabric. So the way you can do that is you set one edge up against the side of your paper, and then you just make sure that it's comfortable. You don't stretch it, you don't shrink it, you just let it be the way it is, and you put a mark on your paper. And then you hold this side tight and you pull, and I'm pulling quite firmly here, but I don't think it's going to make it much further than that. But I'll hold this and then mark it again. Okay, so I've done this once before on this paper with another fabric. Okay, so now what you do is you measure your starting distance, which is 10 1/4, and you write that down, 10 1/4 or 10.25, and then you measure this little distance here, the amount of stretch there was, and I'm gonna call that 2 3/4 or 2.75. And you turn this into a fraction. You put the change, or the amount of stretch there was, on top, the original dimension on the bottom, and then you just divide the numerator by the denominator. So it's going to be 2.75 divided by 10.25. And this decimal can be converted into a percentage. This is the percentage of stretch. So it's 26, move the decimal over 2 places, 26.83% stretch. So what you want, the reason I'm showing you this is because if you find a stocking cap and you decide you want to make your own pattern, you need to make sure that the fabric you're using has the same stretch or percentage stretch, or very close to it, as what your original hat. I've found fabric that has very similar percentage stretch, so I don't have to worry about it not fitting because it doesn't stretch as far. So now I'm just going to go ahead and trace this, but you just kind of get the basic shape, trace around the basic shape here. This is about the general shape you want, and it might be kind of hard to see the pencil lines right now. That's fine. I'll trace it in Sharpie here in a minute so you can see it better. And if you don't want to make your own pattern, I'm going to make this pattern available for download online, so that'll be in the description. I'm going to go ahead and label this as back, and this is front. And this is the front, so you don't want a seam right at your forehead. So this I'm going to remind everyone to place on fold, including me, because I will forget. You can see here how I am retracing the sketched lines with a Sharpie. This will give me a more clear line to follow. It'll be a little bolder, and then I'm adding a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Now I'm just cutting it out, and from here I'll be able to try my first attempt at the hat pattern. Keep in mind here that it is a trial run. This is my drafted pattern, so I did decide to add a little more space at the top of my hat pattern to make the crown and the darts. Here's the hat on the pattern again, and you can see how the seam allowance is pretty close to accurate. I had a costume design instructor that once said, no body is perfectly symmetrical, so your patterns don't have to be either. Also not a super huge perfectionist. And so anyways, the point is, this doesn't have to be exactly the same as the pattern to come out pretty close to identical. I'm just gonna mark, not with a Sharpie, with a pencil, about where this would be if I were to take this piece right here. You can see that this is a continuous piece of fabric, and line it up as close to vertical as I can, and then I'm going to make a mark about here. So hopefully that makes sense, because you have to make 4 seams, and there's a fast way to do that, but to make that curve at the top of your hat, you have to give yourself plenty of fabric up here to be able to make it curve around. At this point, I'm just squaring off the top of the hat pattern, but I have since realized that you actually need 6 darts, not just 4, and so the new pattern does reflect that. So I've gone ahead and marked where my pleats are going to be. They're kind of like darts on the top of the hat. And I have laid this side on the fold. This is the front of my hat, this is the back of my hat. You can see that the side seams on this sweater, super nice sweater. It's 70 cotton, 30% wool, and it's super soft. You can see that the seams on the sweater pretty much match the edge here. So I'm probably just going to cut just on the inside of these seams up to here, and then just follow the pattern along here on this side. As you watch me cut this out, you can see I only have 2 darts on this pattern, but yours will actually have 3 darts, which would translate to 6 total darts sewn in. So hopefully that makes sense, and it does make a much smoother crown. I am cutting just inside these darts because I can always cut them or sew them deeper, but I can never sew them shallower. It's kind of like stretching a piece of lumber. You're on that, right, Dan? Yep. A lumber stretcher? Mm-hmm. Okay. I'll let you know when we have that one perfected. We'll put it in our Amazon affiliate links. Okay. I still have right sides together. This is the fashion side. This is the back side of the fabric. So I'm going to take this to the serger and just sew the back seams together. If you have a Husky Lock 936, I have this set on a 4-thread overlock, length of 2.5, differential of 2. I have the 2 needles in, obviously, and I followed the tension instructions that are auto formatted in there. But I did have to adjust the differential to 2 because it's wanting to kind of stretch the fabric out because this is knit. So here we go. And I'm just making sure a little bit of the fabric is coming off with the cutter knife, just so that I'm sure my needles are going through both layers of fabric. Okay. Now I have these pleats and I want to sew them shut. And what's nice about this is you can sew one and then you just keep letting your thread go out and then you can sew the other one. So go ahead and do this. Show you what I mean by that. Okay, so
are they supposed to be offset?
Let's just look at these things for a second. Each one of these has to be folded in on itself. You're not sewing it to another one over here. You're not doing that. You're pinching the pleat closed and you're stitching it. So don't be tempted to do something weird that's, you know, not that pleat getting closed up. So we'll just start with this one here. Is that what you were asking about?
Yeah.
Okay.
Just wondering, would the ear flaps offset if that was good or not?
For now it's good, yeah.
Okay.
And thank you for double checking because I've done dumb stuff with sewing machines before. Okay, so I just let that run out. Not gonna cut it, don't have to. I can just go to the opposite pleat over here and start sewing that one. I think I just bumped the camera. The smoother you can make this transition down to nothing, the better it will look as a finished product. So now I'm just gonna fold it the other way. And now I have 2 more pleats to do, or darts. They're technically darts because we're not just sewing the fabric in a fold. Back up just a tad more. Make sure your 2 fabrics are even and then just kind of hold them and let the differential pull it in. Tie these really quick. Some people do not tie their serge edges. I do because I've seen them come undone. And the higher end stuff does usually have knots, or they'll have the serge go back on itself. Well, they'll take like a needle and they'll thread the needle and like loop the serging back through. But you don't have to do this step. Okay, I think that's all of those. So now you have this hole in the top of your hat. Some people might want to keep that because they want a place for their messy bun to come through. I guess they're now calling them mom buns, not messy buns. But anyways, You could either sew it all together, serge it across the top like that, and it would actually have a pleat like this on top. Or you could leave a hole for your messy bun. Or you can gather these together. I've gathered them together and it usually looks really nice on top, and then you put the pom pom over the top of that. So we're gonna move on to putting the fur inside the hat. Okay. This is the part you do not want to mess up, because if you do, it is a miserable job seam ripping it, and sometimes really hard to keep your fabric from getting ruined. So the best way to do this so that you're sure it's going to come out right is to find the center back seam on your hat and the center back seam on your fur, and make sure they're right side out, and then put those seams together. So you know that those two are where they're supposed to be. And I'm just gonna go ahead and pin it on the inside. And I'm gonna sew on the fur side. So I'm gonna pin it on the fur side, and I'm gonna pin it so that the pin is facing the raw edge, so that if you do happen to maybe sew over this with your needle accidentally when you're serging or whatever, there's way less chance of you hitting the needle. So I'm actually gonna put it back here a ways. Because you could do this with a serger or a sewing machine, it's, you know, you could move it way out here, so there's no chance your sewing machine needle is gonna hit it. Now I'm going to just roll this all in, and in theory these should pretty well match up. I did cut this a little bit bigger because it's not stretchy, and so I have to cut it to go around my head with no stretch. The knit part can stretch just fine. Okay, so what I'm trying to do here is, since so there's something called turn of cloth, and with turn of cloth you are allowing for the radius of the fabric to turn in, and that takes up space. So if you think about it, the outside edge of your fabric is going to be a bigger dimension than the inside measurement of your fabric when it's rolled over into a cylinder. And so what's happening is, since I have the hat on the inside, that's the stretchy part, it's making it crinkle up. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to turn it out the other way, because the fur can't stretch, but the hat can. So if you're having this issue, just flip it out. Flip it out. And here I go. I've made the two pieces a little more even. Putting the stretchy fabric on the exterior of the cylinder really did help me better align the two pieces of fabric. Now, on your pattern, if you choose to download it, there are notches. Definitely cut out your pieces with the notches included, so it's easier to align the two pieces. Let's take this thing to the serger. I will say this is one of the trickiest parts of the whole process, because you're working with one fabric that's extremely slippery, the fur, and the knit, which is extremely stretchy, and you're trying to somehow get them both to sit in the right place and not slide around while you stitch or serge, and then take the pins out before you accidentally cut them or stitch them with your needles. So it's just kind of a lot to work on all at once, and you know, take your time on this part.
That's because the knit fabric drives the shape.
Right. And it's okay if the fur is a little short on the inside, but it's not okay if the knit is a little weird.
Okay.
So there it is. Pull the fur to the inside. Pop the little earmuffs out. Both sides. Oh, it's so soft and fuzzy. I promise I'm not Cruella de Vil. All right.
Pure 100% imitation sable hair.
Yeah, something like that. Peace. Did somebody ring?
Did you get some stuff in your nose? Or your eye? Or your mouth? Or your ears?
Make it stop. So that was an interesting experience. I realized after trying on the hat that I actually only needed a few inches past the earmuffs of fur. So I had maybe 4 extra inches of fur on the crown, and it made it look like I was wearing a very interesting hat. So in this part of the video, you can see how I've actually cut the fur down quite a bit so it doesn't, you know, hold my hat way above the top of my head. And now I'm just creating the yarn segments that I need for the braids on the sides, and I ended up only needing 5 strands of yarn per braid, and you'll see that here in a minute. But right now what I'm doing is I'm just cutting general lengths of yarn here so that I have enough to do the braids on both sides or both ear muffs. And this does take a while, especially if it's a new ball of yarn. So I went ahead and I got it all cut out and all in a row, and then I grouped it, and it was the closest color I could find to the fur. And if I were to do this again, I think I would also make, you know, maybe some other type of chin closure. This is kind of a traditional option, but I have a surprise for you. After I went through and made this pattern a little more streamlined, I made another hat and I sent it to Rustikate. And so she is actually going to use tatting in her version of the hat as a chin closure, and I'm very excited to share that with you. It's going to really be an interesting project, so you can see 2 different options. Here I'm starting to work on the Pom Pom. This required some trial and error, but I finally settled on a soda can. You could also use a tin can of fruit or veggies. That would probably be a fine size as well. But let me tell you, you wrap and you wrap and you wrap and you think you're done, and then you try it and it's a really boring Pom Pom. So you gotta wrap almost the entire can with yarn. And then I used some paintbrushes I had to keep the 2 groups of loops separated so I could easily cut through the pom-pom when I was done tying it in the center. So that also took a little trial and error. I ended up with a really ugly pom-pom before I did this one, but you can see the process, and now I just leave those. You could use a pen too if you wanted, but I leave those paintbrushes in there, and then I use that as a reference so that I can cut through with my scissors. And then I do have to grab it and kind of hold it in a certain, kind of pinch it and trim it to look kind of round. Otherwise, it doesn't look very nice. And so there's the pom-pom. And it matches the fur okay. If I were to do this again, I would definitely use the fur as the pom-pom, but you know, hindsight is 20/20. They say that necessity is the mother of invention, and that's so true for this little trick I'm using. I got some upholstery thread and I looped my yarn through the upholstery thread, and then I used that to thread it through the upholstery needle. And this has saved me so much time because I end up working with random textiles all the time, and I can never quite get it to thread through the eye of a needle. And this little trick where I loop it with a thin thread and then pull the heavier weight yarn through really has helped a lot. And now I'm just using this upholstery needle to try and drag the yarn through the end of the earmuff. And this does take some strength, and it's a little annoying, but if you work on it enough, you can usually get it to come through the other side. And I'm using 5 strands of yarn for this, and that will make, once it's looped over, that'll make 10 strands of yarn per piece of the 3-part braid. This really does take a while, and I was so glad when this part was done. It's not necessarily hard, it's just time consuming. So once I had all the different segments threaded through, then I separated them all out into each group, and then I weighted down the top of the hat and just started braiding it. And it doesn't take too long once you get the braids going. And I just tied it off with a little piece of thread at the bottom, and I did that again on the second side. Here is another angle of that process. And then when the braid is all done, then I just tied it off at the bottom and then trimmed both braids to be the same length. Now I need to tack the fur lining up and against the knit fabric. So I'm using this light colored yarn, and I'm trying to hide it in the texture of the knit fabric. And I'm just making a very small loop and then tacking it through the fur and the knit fabric and just tying it on the back. And I did this in maybe 4 to 6 points along the hat. I did not. And the moment you've all been waiting for, attaching the pom-pom on the top. That's the final part. This is just me threading through using that upholstery thread again as one direction, and then loop it the other direction. Thread the really thick yarn through the eye of the needle. I punch down through the top of the hat and then back up and around. This is gonna pull that last little hole at the crown of the hat together, and it's also going to provide a way to connect the pom-pom. So notice I'm leaving a little tail and then pulling it snug so that that last little opening at the crown is closing up. And I'm just encouraging it in that general direction. So I have a loop there with 2 tails. I'm going to use the upholstery needle to loop through the base of the pom-pom, and then pull it nice and snug at the crown of the hat. And then I'll use the other leg to tie the 2 pieces together, and the pom-pom will be nice and secure on the crown of the hat. And now that you've seen the first prototype, I'm excited to share that we have the final pattern ready to go, and here is a hat made from that final pattern. Note the pom-pom made out of fur this time, and I'm super excited to see what Rustikate does for the closure. She has mentioned that she's going to use tatting to create that closure, so check her channel out. It's linked in the description. All right, there you go. There's the video. I hope it helps you if you decide to go ahead and download the pattern. The link to the pattern download is in the description, as well as some of the items that I used during the filming of this video. If you want to take a look at those, they're in the Amazon affiliate links in the description as well. We do get a small commission if you so choose to buy one of those items on Amazon. As always, we hope you like, subscribe, share, comment, and then get out there and do something. Bye! This is really slippery. Oh my goodness, I got something in my eye. Sorry. I think it's fur. There's fur.
Why did you get fur in your eye?
Everywhere.
What'd you do that for?
It's like I'm inhaling it. It's going in my eyes. Okay.